Good morning, Springwood. I hope you're all going well this morning and happy Sabbath. God is always showing up for us, but are we looking? I think we can all agree that coffee exists, right? Whether you like it or not, it's out there. So I'm going to make a scale this morning of coffee drinkers. Let's put them on a scale of 1 to 10. There are definitely, probably in the crowd, even here today, there are some 3s. They don't really like coffee. Their go-to order is probably like a chai latte or something. But if they know they've got a big day ahead of them, they might get a dirty chai instead. They're not like super anti-coffee. Then there are the people that are like 6s on the scale. It doesn't cross their mind all the time. They probably wouldn't get coffee for themselves. But if, the office is doing a coffee run, they'll put an order in as well. Then there are the 10s. These are the kind of people who have at least 1 coffee every day, maybe 2, dare I say 3. And even when they're trying to drink less coffee, they'll order like a green smoothie or something thinking that they're doing better, and then they add a shot of espresso to that smoothie. When these people are going on holiday, they don't waste their time researching must do in Sydney. They're looking at best coffee in Sydney, best cafes in Sydney, you know what I mean? That's what they're there for. So how is this relevant at all to how God shows up for us? Well, like God definitely exists. And like the coffee drinkers, I think sometimes we can be like a 5 on the scale. We're only thinking about coffee when it's right in front of us. Or, we're only thinking about God when we're at church or on the Sabbath or when we're listening to a sermon. Or again, some people would never get coffee by themselves, but they'll get one if everyone else is. And so when we're surrounded by people who are talking about God and we're in conversations about faith, it's easy to think about God. But are we thinking about Him and looking for the ways He's working in our lives when we're not? Are we looking for those little things that God is doing in our lives, in our day-to-day lives, every week when, we're not at church or listening to sermons? So where are the places that God does show up for us? I'm sure there are a countless number, but today I've kind of thought of 3, and hopefully they'll be easy to remember. So God shows up for us 1 in the fire, 2 in the fish, and 3 in the fight. Yes, that's alliteration, and yes, my mum's an English teacher. So firstly, in the fire. Daniel 3 is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being thrown into the fiery furnace. And when they were thrown in, their hands were tied, they were handled without care, and they were thrown into the fire in front of a crowd of people. I know that we can often feel like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We can feel helpless, ostracized, different from the world. But in verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say to Nebuchadnezzar before they're thrown into the furnace, "We don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter." Verse 17, "If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us, and He will deliver us from your hand." We'll come back to that. Secondly, God shows up for us in the fish. We've probably all heard of silly little Jonah running away from God. But the fact of the matter is that sometimes we can all be like Jonah. Jonah was scared. He didn't feel ready. He didn't feel like the calling was right for him, or that if he answered the calling, it would work out for him. And our plans are almost always different to God's plan for us. When we think of all our biggest dreams and goals and hopes, it's hard to think that there are better things than that. But that's what God has in store for us. In the fish, Jonah would have felt so alone. He would have been looking at the insides of that fish, the walls of the fish, thinking, how am I ever going to get out of here? And we're the same. We look at our lives and all the tasks and we're thinking, how am I going to get all of this done? How is this all going to work out? When really we need to have less strategy and more surrender. Because God's got it sorted and He shows up for us, and again, He will deliver. Lastly, God shows up for us in the fight. And there are so many instances in the Bible where this happens. David and Goliath, Gideon, Joshua and Jericho. And if you've heard these stories, you can probably picture yourself in that battle, facing the army of people, and you're just one person, and you're thinking, how on earth am I meant to win this battle? But guess what? You won't win it, because God already has. I don't think that God is conditional and that we have to show up for him to show up for us. He's there already. But if we want to see how he is showing up for us, we need to show up to him. One of the many names of God is Emmanuel. It's just up here behind me, and if you've ever seen it spelt with an I, it's the same thing. Emmanuel, is just the Hebrew translation, and the E is the Greek for the linguists among us. But they mean the same thing, and that is that God is with us. Many of us will never hesitate to say, God is always with us. But it's a different story to say, I am always with God. The truth is that God never leaves, and we know that. But for that to mean anything, for that to have any meaning at all, we can't leave either. Because God doesn't move, we do. We move away from him or closer to him. And if you're feeling distant from God, that's not on him, that's on us. So show up to God to see how he's already shown up for you and how he will show up for you.
It may be one of the most misquoted lines, I reckon, in a movie, where the line, Houston, we've had a problem, gets misquoted all the time. But whenever you hear it, it will take you directly back to a particular moment in time, pending you're old enough to remember or you've heard the story before. But it's 1970, Apollo 13. This was the third mission that was meant to go and land on the moon, for somebody to walk on the moon after Apollo 11 and 12. The whole story is messed up from the very beginning. If you know the story, Ken, one of the astronauts who was going to be going up there, had been exposed to measles just a few days before the flight. Just exposed. He didn't have them, and out of interest, he never got them. But he was scrubbed from the mission, just in case he got them halfway through, hurtling to the moon. That's how it all started. They then take off. They replace him with Jack, not from Titanic, and they shoot off towards the moon. They're flying towards the moon. 55 hours in, 2.5 days later, there's an explosion. One of the oxygen tanks explodes. This takes out power, navigation, water. Everything is building up. It also takes out the scrubbers for the CO2. So now everything is just going on for these guys. What do? How do you feel at this moment of time? If you're there, I mean, this is one small little capsule. I would be going nuts in such a small space. I do not like small spaces. They're sitting there now knowing that death is probably imminent. They're now literally freezing, sitting in this small, cramped capsule with no water, barely any food, a buildup of CO2 in there. It very much reminds me of Pathfinder camps in boys' tents, just not with CO2. Basically, these guys are panicking so much now. The movie doesn't show it if you've seen it, but Jim Lovell, who was played by Tom Hanks in the movie, said it is the most amount of panic he's ever had in his life. And I heard that and went, really? Really? Yeah, that would make sense. You don't expect to come back. People have become very blah to the idea of somebody going to the moon at this point. This was only the third mission, but already TV ratings were down. Then all of a sudden, chaos reigned. And the beauty of free-to-air TV, which half of you have never really seen, is that everybody is watching the same event at exactly the same time. And the world tunes in. Why? We love chaos. We love the fear. We love the drama that something bad could potentially happen here. And what Jim said as the captain of that little ship hurtling through space was the one thing that kept them calm was the voice of the controller back at Houston. The calmness of them. Now, they weren't calm themselves, but every time they got on the radio, they had calmed themselves down, they had taken some deep breaths, they got on that radio and were as calm as cucumbers. because they knew that them being all over the shop was not going to help those three guys up in space right then. That is the thing, he said, that really made him centered. Calmness. And he said, this is why I felt calm. This was one of his quotes. I'd never felt more calm knowing the minds that were working on it back at Houston. He was calm because he knew who was behind the scenes, who was there, what they were capable of, what they could do, and he put his trust in them. You can see where this is going. It is still listed by NASA as one of the most successful failures they've ever had. It's one of those oxymoron terms that you sort of go, it's brilliant. It was a very successful failure. They landed these three guys back. They all survived. Not one of them ever went back to space again. Ken, who never got the measles, he went back lots of times. We may not be floating in space right now. You're sitting here in church. We have oxygen. It's a little warm, but we can live with it. The panic and the stress that they felt is something that not many of us have probably felt. But if I turned around now or looked out here and asked you, and please don't, but asked you to raise your hand if sometime in the last 7 days you have felt stress, worry, I would hazard a guess that a lot of hands would actually fly up. 2 years ago, the Morgan Gallup poll, if you've heard of them, they did a global emotions report, a weird one to do. They surveyed hundreds of thousands of people across the globe. And in that particular report, they found that almost half of people responded that they were stressed. Personally, I believe the other half simply hadn't been reading the news. But they were worried, they were stressed. A quarter of them even felt angry. 25% felt angry at that particular point of time when they were surveyed as well. And you may think, well, it's a secular world, they don't have God. But the Barna Group did a very similar study only a year before that. This was to practicing Christians, those who are involved in their church, who attend, who do things within their church community. 42% in the last few years said that even within a church environment, they were struggling with mental, emotional health and stress. This is real. The chaos is real. So we get to Psalms 91, 1-2. Even if you don't know off the top of your head, you will have heard it in song before because Phil Wickham, Shane and Shane, Amy Grant, depends on how old you want to go back, Petra. I can go back a long way. Hillsong have all done songs on this verse. And it says, he who dwells in the shelter of El Elyon will abide in the shadow of El Shaddai. He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. El Shaddai, up here, the Almighty. El Elyon, the Most High. It's easy to panic. It's easy to get stressed at the moment. You could list off so many different things in your world that probably could trigger that. It could be school. It's been exam time. Surely that has caused some stress. Health, finances, it doesn't matter if you've got too little, too much. Businesses, relationships, work, whatever it may be, can trigger you. Here's the thing. God, El Shaddai, El Elyon, does not get caught off guard. There is no chaos in his world. It's weird to think. Even before we were created, there were plans in place in case. He is methodical. His love started before we were created. He doesn't panic. He doesn't get surprised because he knows the beginning from the end. Even those in the Bible who had to fight against him can see that he was the Most High, the Most Almighty. Daniel had been exiled from his homeland. He was living in a pagan city in Babylon. He was surrounded by pagan gods. There was political upheaval. There were plots against his life. People wanted to kill him. Still, he put everything he had into God. His world had collapsed. Through all of this, he still just kept trusting, even though we would look back and go, you stupid man, just pray under your bed next time. Like, why open the window? God would still hear you. but he was that sure of it. Last Friday night, we were watching The Chosen. We often do. And we were watching the episode of Feeding the 5,000, which they then flowed on into Jesus walking on the water. Sorry, spoiler alert, those who haven't seen it. He's walking across the water, and we're looking going, how do the disciples ever not trust him after that? How have you seen Jesus raise people from the dead? How have you seen him just feed 5,000 people that day from a boy's lunchbox? How have you seen him walk across the water through the storm, sit down, not even sit down, call Peter out. Peter drowns, he lifts him up, gets into the boat and says, peace, be still, and it all stops. And yet a short period of time later, they're denying he existed. Would you have been any different? Are we any different? We know all of those stories. We have the advantage of history on our side. We know what he's done and we still struggle to believe. The Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar looked up to Daniel one day and he said, this is a king that had been going mad, if you remember. He had just gone through so much. He looked up to heaven in Daniel 4 and he said, I raised my eyes towards heaven and my sanity was restored, and then I praised El Elyon, the Most High. The most powerful person on earth at that particular point of time had to acknowledge how awesome our God is. How awesome and in control our God is. It's easy to say, it's harder to live, but God's got this. Whatever this is in your life, El Elyon, El Shaddai, he's got this.
Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide, even if it's bitter first. Exodus 15, verse 22. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea. Big story. I won't spoil it. Then they went out into the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. 3 days. How long can a human live without water? 3 days. Imagine it. People desperate, crazed with thirst. Now, when they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Imagine this in your mind. People crazed, about to die, old, young, pregnant, infants, weak, strong, elbowing, rushing to the water's edge. Water, water, water. Drink, drink. Yuck, I'm going to die, not of thirst, from that. Bitter. Therefore, the name of it was called Marah, meaning bitter. The people complained against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? So Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. But when he cast it into the waters were made sweet. There God made a statute and an ordinance for them, and he tested them. He said, if you diligently heed the voice of the Lord, your God, and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I have brought on the Egyptians, for I am Jehovah Rapha, the Lord who heals you. Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. Jehovah Rapha, the Lord who provides healing for you. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees. So they camped there by the water. They traveled 75 kilometers over that 3 days in barren lands with no water for cattle or for people. But they walked in the shadow of the pillar of cloud during the day. The heat of the sun was not a problem for them. Amazing. Let's dive a little deeper into a couple of little tiny things that we'll skip over when we read. The word used in this passage for tree elsewhere in scriptures is translated as stick. I love this because we have a picture of Moses in our mind who pulls this massive tree out and puts it in the water. And we think maybe there's some scientific explanation for how that worked. Maybe it was some really absorbent tree, it pulled the minerals out, I don't know. But no, it can be translated as a twig, as a stick, something tiny. And Moses' contribution to this was pick up a stick and put it in. It reminds us where the real power is. El Shaddai. The power is not in Moses' efforts. They're important. God asked him to do it, and he did. But the power is God working in that moment. It reminds us of what our contribution is. It's also interesting because it means that this is a temporary miracle, a temporary provision just for them, just for the Israelites. If you go to the Saudi Arabia, Mount Sinai area today, there is a spring called Ain Harawa where the water is still bitter today. God's provision was specific, exactly for their needs. That day they would have died had they not gotten there. It was bitter at first, but God provided a means to make the water sweet, not just clean, sweet, the opposite. And it was temporary, special, just for them. Exactly what they need, just for them. He might have taken them to Elim. There was 12 tribes, 12 wells, perfect provision from our perspective. But had he done that, they would have missed out on the opportunity to see God's revelation of glory just for them. What a missed opportunity. Another word, test. Ooh. Nobody likes the idea of being tested by God. And maybe there's a reason for that. This word used for test in this passage can also be translated as trained. God trained them there at Marah, where the bitter water was. This is important. It reminds us that God does not look down at us in our suffering and say, they need a test. Are they up to scratch? Are they good enough in our suffering? No. God does something familiar in this story that reminds me of Jesus. He sees them desperate, thirsty, about to die. He brings them in that state to water where he does a miraculous thing and heals the water and provides for their physical needs. And then he tests them. He teaches and trains them after he's met their physical need. Jesus does this town to town, healing the sick, healing the broken, and then teaches them. He then seeks out what they need in their heart and heals their hearts next. He meets the physical need so that they're able to focus on the teaching. And God does the same in this. He doesn't punish. He teaches after he's provided. The God of the Old Testament is riddled with the handiwork of Jesus. They're the same. He did this so that we'd be able to recognize him when he came. He meets the physical need and then invites the Israelites into a covenant with him. He promises them, if they heed his voice, do what is right in his eyes, give heed to his commandments and his statutes, that he will keep them from enduring the same diseases that the Egyptians suffered from. My first thought was the plagues. Moses put his rod in the water and it turned to blood. It went from clean drinking water to unclean, you'll die if you drink it. And in this story, we see the reverse, right? Moses puts a stick in the undrinkable, unclean water and it becomes clean. But one Bible commentary that I read, preparing for this, gave me a different perspective. This is a quote. Forensic studies of ancient Egyptian mummies indicate that the upper class of Egyptian society suffered from the same diseases that plague the affluent today. If a mummy recently identified as Hatshepsut is genuine, then in later life she was obese, suffering from clogged arteries and diabetes. She may have been royalty, buried in gold, but she was suffering physically from illness. This suggests to me that God was talking about a more literal disease-type healing than plagues. In this covenant, God is not threatening his people in the moment. If you don't follow my commands, then you'll be plagued like the Egyptians. God is promising them, if you follow my commandment, then I will give you this abundant life that is so much better than what you've left behind. Not just away from slavery, but away from everything else. The illness, the things that you've suffered under and that we all suffer under still today. God offers a provision of healing as part of covenant. This Bible passage ends with the image of abundance at Elim. God does actually take the Israelites there. He takes them via the bitter waters, but they still spend one whole month at Elim, living in this image of oasis. And God does the same for us. It's also interesting to note, this is not in my notes, but I think it's way too cool not to share. Anybody who came by Elim later, the water would have been clean and they would have been able to drink. Echoes of gospel for all. That's very cool. His ultimate desire was not only to free them from suffering and thirst, but to ultimately bring the Israelites into an intimate, depending relationship with him. God spoke to Moses from the burning bush. I have seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sorrows. And I have come down, Emmanuel, God with us. I have come down to deliver them out of the land of the Egyptians and to bring them up to a land good and large, to a land flowing with milk and honey. This miracle bitter water at Marah is the first real taste that the Israelites get of sweetness at God's hand. They went from bitter slavery to sweetness. They're given a beautiful promise showing a better way of living following God's commands. So what can we take for ourselves from the Israelite story? Their experience at Marah. We have the privilege of reading about the Israelites' journey through the wilderness. We get to learn from their mistakes and their suffering. We saw that God saw the Israelites' suffering, and we can have faith that he sees our suffering. We are currently, as a family, in a season of bitter water. But reading this story reminds me that sweet water will come. And I know that there will be an element for us as a family where we will have to put the stick in. But until then, until we get the instruction, we're just sitting by the bitter waters, knowing, trusting that he knows our sorrows, he knows and has heard our cry. And because of what God has done for the Israelites, we can know that God will come down to deliver us. God shows up. He is with us. God traveled closely with the Israelites, personally camping among them, both physically being in the pillar of fire by day, cloud by day, fire by night, and in the tabernacle. God came down to be Emmanuel, God with us, in Jesus. And he still reigns, almighty and all-powerful, and leading a way through our chaos and the chaos in the world. He sees us, all of us, in our despair and struggle, and he provides a way for us to be led by him through it. God provided for the Israelites every need and even provided a new way of living for them to follow, to ensure a better life. We can find hope and comfort, even in the midst of our bitter water experience, that God will do the same for us. The healing covenant offered to the Israelites is offered to us. If we follow God's commands, live within his covenant, then our life will be abundantly better for having him in it. He knows us intimately. And even better, he invites us to know him intimately. We are known by name, but we can know him by name too.